Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to tie a bomber because where I fish, I'm using big chironomids most of the time. So this is a 2x long curved nymph hook, and I'm going to put onto it a black 7/64 bead. Now, a few minutes ago, Jack talked about whether he puts the big hole or small hole towards the eye. When I'm tying one with a black bead and gills, I put the large hole towards the eye so there's room for the gills. So let's put this guy back in here. Just make sure you guys can see that okay. And then I'm going to show you, you may know this technique for putting gills on already, but I'm going to show you a way that I like to do it. Doesn't really matter what thread I use for this one. I just happen to have right here some UTC 70 denier. Skinnier is better for putting the gills on. So I'm using this white, put it right side up, this uni floss. It's very bright. I'm not sure if you guys saw this demo before, but watch how this stuff lights up under UV. Like, it really lights up. That's in comparison to uni stretch. Here's uni stretch. Under visible light it looks the same, but notice nothing compared to this. So I like this stuff because once it's wet, it goes all floppy and it doesn't gather algae. So in lakes where there's a lot of algae, it's a consideration. If there's no algae, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. What I'm doing is I took a length, a few centimeters long, I cut it in half, then I'm going to cut it in half again. So I got 4 strands here to tie in, and I'm going to tie them in just behind the eye, a couple of turns. Get them more or less even. Then I'm going to turn them spent, like this. Crisscross them. So you can see I've got them at 90 degrees to the hook shank. Then I will just bind down behind, whip finish back there. It doesn't need to be much of a whip finish because that's going to be all covered up with stuff afterwards. Cut this off. Then when I push the bead forward, it's going to push all those fibers forward. I'm going to cut them off later. Now I'm going to use my uni stretch. I learned this trick from John Kent. I don't know if he's the first one to ever do it, but I wondered how he got his bodies so nicely tapered on his chironomids and did it so fast since he's a commercial tyer. And he told me he uses this uni stretch for his underbodies. So I started using it too on the big ones, and it's nice because it builds up a taper very quickly. So I'm just going to push the bead forward with it. Move this out of the way so you can see. Cut off the excess. And then what I'm going to do here is just build a nice underbody. I want this fly to be fairly stout since I'm imitating a bomber. So go down, part way down into the hook. You might notice that I'm giving the bobbin holder a spin once in a while to take the twist out, because of course every time you take a turn of thread, you're putting a twist into the thread. Then I'm going to go back up. If I want this fly to be bright, and I want the color of the underbody to really show, I'm using white uni, because whatever I put over top of it is going to maintain its color. That's probably good. I find also that if I just wiggle it back and forth a bit, I can get it to flatten out a little bit more. I really like to try to avoid lumps if I can. Then just do a half hitch up here. So now I've got my underbody and I've got a nice taper there. I'm going to cut my gills off now just to get them out of the way. The way I like to cut gills is another trick I learned from Phil, is to lay my scissors on the back of the bead and tilt them so that the blades are at about 45 degrees, and pull the gill material over nice and tight like that, and then make one smooth cut. And it ends up having the gills nicely flared out on a curve, so they look natural that way. And you can kind of see it from this angle. You can see there's 2 puffs of gills sticking out there. Now I'm going to switch to, the fly I'm tying here is one that I use to imitate those nice bright green ones at Tunqua. So I'm using a bright green thread to change the body color. So I'm now just going to restart this thread behind the bead. This is going to be my underbody color. And on this one I'm going to use copper brown for the rib color. So this is copper brown. Where's right side up on that? Copper brown UTC wire. I really like this UTC because it doesn't lose its color when it gets solvent on it and stuff. Some cheap wires I've found, the color will come off when you get solvent on it, like head cement and stuff. I always bind my wire in on the side because chironomid pupae are wider than they are tall. They're flattened slightly, and they also, if you look at some of the naturals, they've got a little, like it looks like a line down the side. So at least I'll get it on one side here. So I'm just going to cover this with actually I'm going to tie something else in a second here too. This is anti-static bag. Now not all anti-static bag is created equal. So it's worth gathering as much of this stuff as you can get your hands on. It's free. You know, any computer place or somebody you know that does computers can get these things. This is what they put components in so that it won't get zapped by static electricity. Some of it's really opaque. You can't even see through it. Some of it, like this, you can probably see. You can see my fly right through it there, see? This very translucent, and I chose this stuff specifically because it's translucent and because I want this underbody color to show through it. And I'm also going to be leaving gaps between it as I wrap it up. So I cut it quite narrow. This is, you know, like less than 1/8 of an inch thick. The one downside of this stuff is it's really fragile. So I hope I'm not going to jinx myself, but when you tie it in, you got to be really gentle with it. So I'm tying it in, and I'm going to bind it all the way down to the bend. Once you've got it bound in, you can stretch it very slightly. Really be careful with the hook point with this stuff. I'm trying to make a nice smooth underbody. Now if I wanted this to have a red butt, I would get my red felt pen and I would color that thread red before I wrapped up the butt, and then it would leave a red butt underneath. Or I can always color it later afterwards. Now I'm just going to come all the way back up with touching turns of thread so I get a green underbody. Untwist it periodically so it lays flat. And, oops, caught one of my gills there, gotta be careful. Stop right there. And I'm going to switch threads again to the brown olive. So I'm going to use brown olive for the thorax because I'm going to put wing pads on this thing. If I was going to just imitate wing pads with thread, I would use this stuff for the thread, which is burnt orange thread, which will do an okay job of suggesting the wing pads, but I'm going to actually put wing pads on this. So I'm using brown olive. So I'm just restarting this here. Throw a half hitch in. This is where the rotary is handy. I'm now going to very carefully, I'm going to hold this with my finger when I first move it around so I don't break it. And I'm going to wrap this up in open turns. I'm leaving a little gap between each turn. Bind it down behind the eye. Cut this as close as I can. Throw another half hitch in. Now I'm going to follow that rib up with my copper brown. just right behind the previous rib. This is where a rotary vise is really nice to have. So look, can you see it okay on there?
Yeah. Looks good.
Find that down. I never cut my wire with my scissors. I just put my thumbnail on it and wiggle and break. So I don't dull my scissors, plus it leaves a dull end on the wire which won't cut the thread. Now I'm going to build up a little bit of a thorax. Come back up here. Now here's where I'm going to put my wing pads in. What I'm going to use for wing pads is something I tried last summer that worked really well. It's Uni Mylar, which is peacock and orange. So on one side it's this peacock color, but the color I really want is the orange, which is on the other side. So you can see on this side it's orange. So I'm going to take a chunk, cut it in half, and then I'm going to tie it in right on top. She'll do. Try and get them even. It's a little bit fiddly, but the tips even. I'm going to pull them up underneath. Pull them into length. There. So now I've got two strands tied in, peacock side up. Now I'm going to build a nice little thorax here. Make it as smooth as I can. I'm going to stop down at the back end of the thorax. And now I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to flip these over. I'll do my side first and you'll see it. I'm going to pull them across at a 45-degree angle onto the bottom and then bind it down like that. And then I'll do the other one coming the other way at a 45-degree angle like this. Did you see the one that was being passed around?
Mm-hmm.
You see what it's going to look like when it's done. And then very carefully cut that nice and close. A couple more turns. It doesn't take much back at that end because I'm going to coat the whole thing with super glue, so I don't need much of a whip finish. Just a couple of turns is all I need. So now I've got something suggesting those wing pads, which are usually on an angle, and that bright orange. And I last summer fishing with my wife, it was kind of slow, we weren't getting much, and I had an experimental fly with wing pads on it, so I threw it on her line and she just started pounding them and I wasn't barely getting a sniff. So I went in and tied a bunch with these wing pads and boy, they were effective. Now I'll just give it a good coating of super glue. And you can see that translucent anti-static isn't super shiny, but it does give that little hint of shininess at each segment, which the naturals often have, especially before they're really inflated. And that is it. And then I would let it dry and then give it another coat. There's that little thing I was telling you about that I put in the container, just that little silica gel stuff. And that's it. That's the double rib anti-static. And I always found this uni stretch, you can get it in different colors. So if I wanted a dull, like a darker olive underbody, I would use this stuff and not bother having to change colors with thread. This would be my underbody color. And then there's another one that's kind of a wine, like maroon color. So you could use that and then you get like a red rib in between, and then you could maybe use a silver rib to follow or something like that. And kills two birds with one stone, gives you your taper and your underbody color. It's dandy stuff. Okay. Oh, and another little trick, if you don't know this, save synthetic wine corks, because you don't want to touch that fly until it's dry, right? Or you just go like this, poke it in, take it out, and set it aside.